When it comes to escort carriers, some names stick out more than others. USS Gambier Bay, for example. And from the same action, USS White Plains. You might even know of USS Liscombe Bay, a terrible sinking in its own right. Today's video, we'll look at none of these. Instead, we will look at USS St. Another famous name. A ship lost in the Battle of Samar, but after the Japanese fleet had withdrawn. No, St. would not be sunk by gunfire, or by traditional air attack for that matter. She would, instead, be the first major victim of an intentional kamikaze attack. A painful way to be remembered, to be sure, and the kind of thing that overshadows the rest of the career, for better or worse. Like many ships, St. is ultimately remembered for her sinking and nothing else. Before we can talk about that, I will cover the rest of the carrier's service life. A career that started under a different name. Two of them, actually. The first name, USS Chapin Bay, was the carrier's designation when she was laid down on January 3rd, 1943. This was in the Kaiser Shipyard in Vancouver, Washington, not the more famous Canadian city. This would also prove to be fairly short-lived. By April of the same year, Chapin Bay would receive her first name change. Specifically on April 3rd, when the name changed to USS Midway, in honor of the battle of the same name, and quite a prestigious name for a little escort carrier. From all I've heard, the ship's crew was quite proud to have this name, with admittedly good reason. This will also be relevant later on. For now, construction continued on the escort carrier. Midway would be launched on August 17, 1943, a little over 7 months after keel laying, which is right on track with others of the type. Fitting out progressed equally fast, with USS Midway commissioned into the United States Navy on October 23, 1943. The ship the Navy received was just one of many, many escort carriers. In this case, one of the 50-strong Casablanca class, the first purpose-designed escort carriers in the fleet. These were generally well-built and capable warships, although fairly small. I have a video going more in depth on escort carriers in general that I'll link in the description. For the Cliff Notes version, these were small ships intended to get out as quickly as possible, for aircraft ferries, convoy escort, and other secondary roles. For these duties, the ships didn't need to be particularly large or fast. They just needed to carry aircraft and support the fleet, which the various designs did quite well. Although the ships did pick up some unfortunate nicknames, such as combustible, vulnerable, expendable, in relation to the CVE designation, and their relative lack of protection. In any event, as a Casablanca class, USS Midway had the following details. A displacement of around 8,300 tons at standard loading. This rose to around 11,000 tons at the full load, although it would vary between ships. That displacement allowed for carrying 27 aircraft on average, a mix of F4F Wildcats and TBF Avengers, or by this point of the war, FM Wildcats and TBM Avengers. The Wildcats were certainly not as good by this point for combat operations, but they were better for operating from the smaller decks, and the Avengers were better for the escort carriers than the big Helldiver dive bombers. As for defensive weaponry, these ships were lightly armed, a single 5-inch gun mounted on the stern, and a collection of 40mm Bofors and 20mm cannon varying between ship and time period. This could reach as many as 8 twin 40mm mounts and 30 single 20mm cannon, for a total of 1 5-inch gun, 16 40mm barrels, and 30 20mm cannon. All of this was pushed through the water at 19 knots by 9,000 shaft horsepower through 2 shafts. And with those details done, we can now return to the service history. This began in November 1943, for a certain value of began. For the following month, Midway would sail up and down the west coast on training and sea trials, In December, this would shift to include ferry duty, taking the carrier as far as Pearl Harbor, a role that the ship would remain in through the new year. Midway loaded a cargo of aircraft and passengers on January 7, 1944, and sailed for Australia on her longest voyage to this point. This would see the ship arrive on January 27th, where the carrier unloaded her cargo and promptly picked up more aircraft for the return trip, which saw her return to the West Coast on February 16, 1944, at which point Midway returned to training and workup duty for the early part of the year, until April 21st to be specific, when the Escort Carrier sailed for Hawaii once again. This would turn out to be the last time the ship saw the West Coast, because after this ferry and training period, Midway was finally sailing for active combat. If you'd like to know more about this early period, I always link the Dictionary of American Naval Fighting Ships in the description. It's not quite day to day, but this specific entry has quite a lot of interesting detail if you like that sort of thing. The same goes for the combat operations later on. In any case, USS Midway arrived in Pearl Harbor on April 27, 1944. She remained there until May, when the ship set sail for Eniwetok, arriving there on June 8, 1944. At this forward operating base, the ship loaded up on supplies for her first combat operation, supporting the operations in the Mariana Islands, specifically the invasion of Saipan, on June 14th. Midway would send up strike aircraft to hit the island in preparation for the landings on the 15th. This was all fairly routine duty, all told. The carrier would operate off Saipan until July 13th, 1944. Her planes and pilots would do admirable work in both defending the American fleet and supporting the Marines ashore. In fact, Midway would come out of this entire affair without suffering any damage, while her planes flew close support for basically the entire period, and she would be right back at it soon enough. Midway's departure on July 13th was simply to return to Eniwetok for rest and resupply, mostly the latter as the carrier arrived on July 16th, before leaving almost immediately when the resupply was done on July 18th. The carrier and her crew went right back to the Marianas when that was done, this time to support operations on Tinian on July 23rd, which followed much the same pattern of supporting the operations ashore and protecting the fleet, although the second mission was less exciting in the aftermath of the turkey shoot. This would also be a shorter mission in general, with Midway departing on July 30th. The carrier returned to the Marshall Islands before departing for the Admiralty Islands on August 9th. Midway would remain in that general area until September and her third combat operation, that being the invasion of Morotai, which began on September 15th, a mission that Midway would remain on until September 22nd, and saw the same general theme: Avengers and Wildcats taking off to strafe and bomb Japanese positions ashore. This was what escort carriers did best, and Midway was no exception. Her pilots and aircrew, veterans by now, were a well-oiled machine, and performed their duty without issue or complaint until the carrier was once more pulled back for resupply. This would end up being a short reprieve, as Midway returned to Morotai on September 27, 1944. Support operations began once more, this time lasting until October 3rd, where a moment of excitement came for the carrier, not just the pilots. Lookouts aboard Midway around 8 a.m. spotted 2 torpedo wakes. These originated with the submarine RO-41 and missed the carrier. One did, however, slam into the stern of the destroyer escort USS Shelton. This crippled the ship, which eventually sank from the damage. Midway, for her part, departed the area. The carrier would arrive at her destination, Sea Adler Harbor, on October 7, 1944. Other than the anti-submarine operations, it was a routine return voyage. It was also, as it turned out, the last one under the name USS Midway. On October 10, 1944, the carrier's name was changed. USS Midway was reassigned to the first of the new fleet carriers, while the escort carrier became USS St. This was in honor of the Battle of St. in France, and was, in any other circumstance, a perfectly fine and respectable name. It was, in this circumstance, a very disliked change. Sailors, as a general rule, don't view changing a ship's name in a good light. At least after entering service, with a change under construction not seen so negatively. To change a name in service, however, is to invite bad luck and misfortune. Regardless of if you believe that or not, or if you even believe the crew felt it was bad luck, well, they were certainly peeved at the name change in general. Midway was a proud naval name. It was the name they had served under, fought under, and lost friends under. And now, out of the blue, the name was taken away and given to some fleet carrier. That certainly caused some bad feelings among the crew. Nonetheless, they put up with it, and USS St. departed harbor on October 12th. This would be her final mission in support of the liberation of Leyte. It would see St. arrive off the island on October 17th, and as part of Taffy 3, support the landings until October 24th. This went well enough at first. The crew and pilots did much the same work they had done before in the Marianas and at Morotai. Then came the dawn of October 25th, 1944, and the end of USS St. The Battle of Samar is a well-trodden story, and one I've covered from multiple different angles at this point. For now, I'll put focus on St. for this video. Her role began almost immediately as an Avenger, piloted by Ensign Bill Brooks, spotted the Japanese center force. This plane and pilot was from St. making her the first to sight the Japanese formation. This occurred at around 6:50 in the morning. Soon enough, the Japanese entered visual range and began opening fire on the escort carriers of Taffy 3. In response, the carriers turned away and made their best speed away from the Japanese. As this was only around 19 knots, they could never hope to escape. So the formation made smoke while the brave stand of the destroyers and destroyer escorts began. St. During this portion of the battle, would escape damage. The carrier ducked in and out of smoke, while Japanese shells fell all around. St. even claimed 3 hits on an enemy cruiser at around 14,000 yards. This was with her 5-inch gun, although confirming those hits is difficult. Hits or no hits, the carrier would continue to evade damage, while her pilots supported the destroyers and escorts. In fact, through the entire main action, St. only suffered 3 wounded from shrapnel. The ship herself came out unscathed. This was good luck when considering what happened to the other carriers, like White Plains or Gambier Bay. However, that luck would fall off a metaphorical cliff. The Japanese formation departed around 9:30 a.m. on October 25th. Only an hour and a half later, at 10:50, a new attack began. This, at first, seemed like a typical Japanese air attack. That was not the case. One of the Japanese aircraft, a Mitsubishi Zero, flew alongside the carrier, before turning around directly at the ship. St. captain immediately ordered a turn, while the anti-aircraft guns opened fire, only for the shocked crew to watch as the Zero continued through the fire, before diving right into the deck around the 5th arrestor wire. The initial damage seemed relatively minor, but fires had broken out. These would cause a series of massive explosions, wrecking the flight deck and causing severe damage to the hull. The fires and explosions, raging out of control, forced the crew to abandon ship. Within 30 minutes of the impact, the carrier had sunk. 113 of the 889 men aboard were killed or missing. Another 30 would later die of their wounds. St. good fortune in the surface action had run out in the air attack, and she would, as a result, go down in history as the first major victim of the new kamikazes. As for the wreck, That was discovered on May 14th, 2019 by RV Petrol. I have covered this as well, and will link that in the description for those interested. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and I'll see you in the next one.